The NBA has changed so much over the years. One of the biggest ways the game has changed is at the power forward position. Yes, the position still technically exists, but now it's hardly distinguishable between the other positions on the court. Back in the 1980s, the 90s, and the 2000s, the position had a very unique identity and personality, and contributed to the game in very specific ways, but now, not so much. You have players like Giannis who treat the position like a slashing wing. You have guys like Karl Anthony Towns and Kristaps Porzingis, who are finesse-style big men who prefer shooting jumpers and three-pointers rather than posting up. Bigs like this are so common that they're completely interchangeable with the center position, and it's why guys like Towns and Porzingis are so frequently switching between the two positions. Now, even a guy like Kevin Durant, who was traditionally a small forward, is now playing at the power forward position over the last 5 seasons. Regardless of the fact that he primarily shoots jumpers, is not an elite rebounder, and regardless of the fact that he weighs about 12 pounds soaking wet. There's literally no power in this power forward. Long gone are the days of strong and imposing power forwards like Charles Barkley and Karl Malone. Long gone are the days of physically punishing enforcers like Charles Oakley and Rick Mahorn. So this might have some of you asking, what actually happened? Why is today's 4 spot so unrecognizable by the standards of generations past? Well, in order to answer that, we have to go back in time, and let's start with the NBA's infancy. During these earlier eras, the game was essentially determined by the strength of your interior presence. For a while, it was widely believed that you could not win an NBA championship without a superstar quality big man or two. And for the most part, the results backed that up. George Mikan completely dominated the 1950s. Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain won all of the championships in the 1960s. In the 1970s, it was a revolving door of success between guys like Dave Cowens, Willis Reed, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, Wes Unseld, and Elvin Hayes. And then, in the 1980s, even though Magic Johnson and Larry Bird had the greatest rivalry of that era, even they had strong supporting big men, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Robert Parrish, and Kevin McHale. Moses Malone broke through and won a championship that decade, and the Detroit Pistons won back-to-back championships as an elite defensive team with Rick Mahorn and Bill Laimbeer as the faces of that defense. Elite big men were absolutely essential for winning, and it basically boiled down to the fact that the game was designed in such a way to emphasize the 4 and 5 spots. Throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the three-point line did not yet exist in the NBA, which meant that the most valuable shots that a player could take was efficient 2-point shots that were taken close to the basket, which naturally works in favor of the 4s and 5s. Even in the 1980s, the three-point line was still yet to become a major aspect of how the game operates. In the entire 1980s decade, entire teams averaged just 3.5 three-point attempts per game. This means that the average NBA team in the 80s was shooting less than 1 three-point attempt per quarter. As coaches in high school preach all the time, long shots equals long rebounds. And that's because the force of the ball hitting the rim is harder when it's taken from a greater distance. With more shots being taken closer to the basket, more rebounds were being secured under the rim, which was yet another reason why it was so essential for the power forward spot to be held by a player who was strong and who could box out with his size and strength. There was simply too many rebounds up for grabs for you to start a skinny forward who couldn't box out effectively. Then there's the aspect of physicality and punishing the offensive players for attacking the basket. This was a normal occurrence in the 1980s, essentially because it was something that was permitted by the league and by their referees. The flagrant foul rule wasn't strongly implemented into the NBA until the 1990 season, which means that during the 1980s, defensive players were not in danger of getting ejected for an excessively physical foul. There was also almost no instances where the offensive player was fouled, shot free throws, and kept the possession. Instead, nearly every excessively physical foul was simply treated as a common foul. And due to this, it made sense for a defensive player to get, quote, his money's worth when fouling the offensive player. Strong and imposing power forwards would try to punish slashing wings in the painted area, and would try to intimidate them and make them think twice about whether or not they wanted to attack the basket next time. Now tell me, if you're the offensive player and you know you're going to be fouled hard at the rim, which defensive power forwards would be more intimidating to you? Guys like Kristaps Porzingis and Kevin Durant, or guys like Karl Malone and Rick Mahorn? The answer is obvious, and now you're beginning to understand one of the benefits of having a strong enforcer at the 4 spot during that era. The reason the NBA decided to strongly enforce the new flagrant foul rule in 1990 was in order to crack down on teams like the Bad Boy Pistons, who were using their physical brutality as a way to intimidate opposing star players, which obviously put those stars at risk of serious injury. Even with the flagrant foul rule now firmly in place, there were still strong back-to-the-basket power forwards throughout the 90s and 2000s. But all of that changed dramatically in the 2010s. The game was changing, and so were the rules and the style in which it operated. Alongside of the analytics movement, there was also the rise of Steph Curry, who made basically every GM envious of his talent and his limitless range, and had basketball fans reimagining what was possible. For years, the amount of three-point shots being attempted was steadily increasing, but after Steph Curry broke out as an era-defining superstar, the volume of three-point attempts spiked dramatically league-wide, and to this very day, it is still on the rise. It's got to the point where not only superstars are jacking up threes, but ideally, every player on the court is attempting multiple threes per game. A player like Dirk Nowitzki was once seen as a unicorn in the 2000s, but nowadays, that's simply the style of the standard power forward, which is also referred to as a stretch 4. Now that nearly half of the shots attempted per game are three-pointers, there are long rebounds up for grabs continuously. In 1985, only 5 guards averaged over 5 rebounds per game, and now, 40 years later, that number has tripled. There's simply more rebounds up for grabs for the perimeter players, and less for the interior players, which means is no longer crucial for guys at the 4 spot to be strong enough to box out the competition. Something else to consider is that if the stretch 4 is now the standard offensively, then that will naturally pull the defending power forward away from the interior as he tries to defend his man, which makes low post strength even less necessary. Again, this is why a 7-foot stick like Kevin Durant could move seamlessly from the 3 spot to the 4 spot in the latter half of his career, because essentially the power forward position has just become a really tall small forward. This is how the traditional power forward died in the NBA, and honestly, I don't see it making a return anytime soon, because unless the NBA suddenly brings back physicality and limits the amount of three-pointers taken, then it simply makes sense for the power forward to be the way it is today, even if that means that there's no longer any power in the power forwards. Do you wish to see the return of the traditional position? And if so, how could the NBA bring it back? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.